Maeve Mannion.
Grant.
Tell me all about your PhD.
It gives me a significant amount of grey hairs. I know. Well, I suppose why I got into it. So when I was growing up, I grew up playing a lot of sports, rugby, basketball, camogie, and I just noticed that there was, I suppose, a lack of resources for female athletes, and that led me down the direction of strength and conditioning so that I could essentially provide S&C for female athletes. That's like predominantly what I did when I came out of college. And then I decided, I got this bright idea that I wanted to be a lecturer. So in order to do that, you have to do a PhD.
Right.
And you would think doing a PhD that like you're somewhat academic, but like I actually promise you, I'm not as academic as I might come across. So in order to be a lecturer, I had to go on and do a PhD. And the only thing that I was like remotely interested in was the menstrual cycle. So when I was doing my final year project, I did a narrative review. So it was during COVID. So basically we couldn't like go out and collect data. We had to use either data that was given to us or we had to summarize all of the literature that was there. So I was powerlifting at the time. So I was obviously like heavily interested in strength sports. So I started looking into all of the literature that was there in terms of how exercise performance may or may not vary over the course of the menstrual cycle. So then it came around that I wanted to essentially go for a PhD. So how it works in Carlow is I'm actually on a full scholarship. So you apply for that. They basically send out a title and you apply for it. So the day I was graduating, I was like very unsure because not every year they give funding for it. So I was very unsure whether it would happen or not. And I have plan A, no plan Bs ever. I'm like dead set. This is what I'm going to do. So the day I was graduating, they released them. So I applied for it and it was like a 6-month turnaround between when I applied. You do an interview with like your supervisors, the head of department, and then the head of research in the college. So then they gave it to me. So originally the title was The Effects of the Menstrual Cycle and Body Composition on Performance and Perceived Performance in Elite Female Athletes. So when I started that in September 22, I was like to my supervisors, look, I am a powerlifter. I love strength sports. How can we gear it towards that? And they were like, well, you can't just look at powerlifting. And I was like, I'm gonna make this into powerlifting. So that's kind of, I spent the first year like ripping up the plan that they had given me and making a new one. So then I landed on like, you basically you have a working title, say, for the first like couple of years, I suppose. So now it's kind of geared towards an investigation of the menstrual cycle in female athletes competing in weight category sports.
So that's the interesting part, obviously, and that doesn't. You've kind of managed to like in through the back door get the weight class in there for powerlifting. You can definitely figure a bit more out. And I think that's probably what's going to keep you interested in it for longer as well, because it directly ties into something that could affect you or people you work with, because we do compete in a sport with weight classes. But you mentioned at the beginning the lack of information or resources available around female performance in sports. So was there a particular event or was there a thing that you said, like, why do we not have more information about that particular topic? I know you've since gone into the menstrual cycle, but was there, in your very robust background in performance and sports, was there a particular thing that you said, why do we not know more about this?
I suppose it probably all stemmed from me as an athlete. Like I grew up doing like Leinster trials for rugby. And each year I would get to the very last round and I'd be like, how do I get into the actual squad? Like, why am I only getting to the last round? So like I picked up a bit of an interest, say, in strength and conditioning, and I was like, okay, well, if I get like fitter and faster and stronger, then maybe I might get into the actual squad. But I suppose the like main, factor for me, when I was doing my final year project, I read a paper and I was like literally stunned. So it was a paper that came out in 2014 from Costello et al., I think. So basically they had summarized all of the literature in sport and exercise science, like to the best they could, and concluded that only 4 to 13% of all sport and exercise research is done on solely females.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, what the hell? Like, that's not good enough. Like, because they then came out, and this paper has since been updated, or like at least this statistic. So Paris 2024, which I'm sure you've heard, everyone has seen it online, is set to be the most sex balanced Olympic Games to date. So it's essentially a 50-50 split from males and females. So if only 4 to 13% of all of the literature that we have in sport and exercise science is done on a female-only cohort, what an unjust, like, we're doing to our females. So I read this and I was like, obviously there's been like many great researchers. But I'm like, people keep noticing this. Like, I'm definitely not the first to read this paper and notice this. But I'm like, why is nobody doing anything about it? Or if they are, where is it? Where can I find it?
Yeah.
And how can I tell other people about the research that is there? So that was the nail in the coffin for me. Once I read that, I thought, oh my God, what an injustice to female athletes, essentially.
Gonna fucking do something about this.
Essentially, yeah. I was like sat like typing up my narrative review during COVID while everyone's popping off doing TikTok dances. And I'm like, this is such an injustice. Like, how can I solve this, essentially? So that's the reason why I went the route that I did. Obviously, I want to lecture. You have to do a PhD to lecture. But like I was saying, I'm actually not, I wouldn't be the best in terms of academia. Like, I was never a standout student in school, ever. And everyone is like, oh, you're doing a PhD. Like, you must be smart. I'm like, no, you just have to be really, really resilient.
And persistent in your efforts. You know,
And
that's an
yeah.
awful lot of time to commit to something.
Yeah, too long. Far too long. I'm like, I'll be 28 when I'm done.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, that's a long time in education as well, you know?
Yeah. So you have to, it has to be a topic that you're going to like. Otherwise, like, on the shit days where you get like a heap of corrections back, or somebody tells you, like, a man in an office told me that I couldn't do the first study that I was doing because on the form that they had sent me, I'm in SETU, or Southeast Technological University, Carlow. Everything was written as SETU, and he was like, that's not the name of the university that you're attending. I was like, are you fucking joking me? So like, on them days, yeah, you have to be persistent.
It's people being obtuse.
Yeah, well, they have to be, like, they're just doing their job.
Fair.
It makes your life very hard.
Yeah, I did a little bit, like, not very much, but like a little bit of I was doing a little bit with Setanta College at one stage last year. The year before last? I can't remember. But do you know when you have to do your citations and you have to do the Harvard referencing and stuff like that? Bane of my life.
There's a whole software that you can just like plug it in and pop it out.
I only discovered that on like the third paper, and it's a class, but still bane of my life, like, you know. And I suppose that's kind of a big precursor to this conversation when it does come to. You will be obviously acutely aware of this. We've had these conversations before. There's an awful lot of grey area in what we actually know about female health and performance, particularly around things like the menstrual cycle, that you'll see on like Instagram's a prime culprit where people are filling in gaps with. Now, and look, for lack of more experience, for lack of evidence, people are going to use lived experience. But like, is there anything that you have identified as, like, so look, you identified there was a gap in the evidence and research. So you're like, rather than complain about it online, I'm going to go fucking do something about it.
Yeah.
But has there been anything that you see as a persistent, I don't want to call it misinformation, but something that lacks grounds and evidence that you see pop up time and time again when it comes to female performance as it relates to the menstrual cycle?
For me, and I suppose to like tie it back into powerlifting, a big thing now is like cycle-based training, or cycle phase-based training. So a lot of like Instagram accounts are coming out now and saying, oh, if you're in this phase of your menstrual cycle, you should train like this. And even the tracking apps that we would use to track our cycles, they're giving recommendations. So like, oh, you're in your follicular phase, you should like go hit a PB. You're in your luteal phase, you should stay at home.
Do a bit of stretching.
It's like, number one, as athletes, we don't have that luxury. What happens when a competition falls in a certain phase of your cycle that you perceive yourself to perform a little bit worse? What do you do then? Like, these are not practical applications. These are not helpful. And if anything, like what you read, you then like I suppose can perceive it to
Internalize
be.
it almost, yeah.
Yeah. So like if you read that, oh, I'm weaker in my luteal phase, you're going to perceive yourself to be weaker when it may not actually be the case.
I think a lot of it is that though. It's perception and what you're educated to believe. Like, so I listened to your appearance on the Her Sport podcast.
Yeah.
And so some of the information gleaned from that was, I will say that like this is one thing I deal with a big cohort of female powerlifters.
Yeah.
So I do my best to try and learn more about these things. But like you said, there isn't as much information out there as we might like. But one of the things we can do is have the lifter track where they are in their cycle, how long their cycle is, because it is different for every woman, and whether or not they're using contraception plays a part in that as well, which we might touch off shortly. But also how the lifter perceives how they feel on that given day or given week or given time in the cycle. Because I'll give you a prime example. I have one lifter who the week prior to her period feels the worst. And then the week of her period feels phenomenal.
Yeah.
Whereas I've got people that are complete opposite to that. So it is very much that case of like most other variables in training, it's completely individual. So I know recently then you did some information gathering in powerlifting. You were looking for female powerlifters to like send in some information. Obviously it's anonymous. We're not going to ask about the participants, and I know you're probably still going through the data, but has there been any standout bits and pieces from that data so far?
So I suppose how that came about and what the data was that I actually collected. So in order for me to come to the conclusion that, okay, maybe we need to look at menstrual cycle symptomology, I had to take it back a step because like we're literally, for want of a better phrase, pissing into the wind. Like we've no clue what's happening. So basically I had to go and I had to summarize all of the literature that is there in terms of menstruation or menstrual cycle or whatever way you want to phrase it and weight class sports. So I did a narrative review, so essentially a summary of the literature that's there, and I got 11 papers. So like think about like there's millions of papers in sport and exercise science research, sports performance, sports psychology, like millions. I got 11 papers. Like to me, that's terrifying. Like when you combine menstrual cycle and weight categories, 11. So that kind of highlighted a few key themes for me. Now I'm like still finishing that paper to be sent for publication at the end of the year. But essentially what that highlighted to me is that even when we're researching weight categorized sports, we don't actually consider that they're weight category athletes. So we don't consider that they have to be a specific body weight at a specific day to be eligible for competition. That's a big factor.
Yeah.
You miss weight, you're not competing, or you're competing as a guest. They also vary a lot in terms of the quality of the research. So while I was saying, only 4 to 13% of the literature is done on a female-only cohort, we also have to look at the quality. So it's actually really poor. So from study to study, the methods vary. So like not to go in like too detail and sciencey, but basically when you're looking at the menstrual cycle, so we've our 3 phases. We've our follicular phases at the start. So that's when you bleed. Then our ovulation is in the middle, and then your luteal phase. And for the average person, it'll be 28 days. Again, highly individualized. These are just the science facts that they spit out at you. So basically, there's different ways of investigating how performance might vary over the menstrual cycle phases. And a lot of the research will use what's called the counting method. So day 1, when you get your period, that's day 1. And the next day 1 is the next day 1, say, of your next period. So say there's 28 days, they'd be like, okay, you have a 28-day cycle, so ovulation has to be in the middle. Or if it's 30 days, 15 days, or 30-day cycle, ovulation has to be in the middle, day 15. But like they're not considering body temperature, they're not considering bloods and estrogen and progesterone, how that varies in the blood. So because all of them methods are different across the papers, we can't really apply it. Because we've no idea what's actually happening. So that was like another big thing. And then the last kind of big thing for me was symptomology and how that may vary over the course of the menstrual cycle phases, how it might affect weight category athletes more than non-weight category athletes, or even how we perceive our performance to vary over the course of the menstrual cycle phase. So that led me on to the study that I've just done. So that was actually 2 studies in one. So essentially I did a questionnaire to investigate menstrual cycle symptomology, so the prevalence and the severity of the symptoms in female weight category athletes. And then I also looked at weight making practices and how that may or may not affect menstrual cycle phases.
So like water cuts, gut cuts, prolonged calorie deficits, things like that. Yeah. So actually that's an interesting point, because it kind of removed from the world that we're in of like weight class sports, but another part of the fitness world, and people I've had on the podcast previously have talked about it, is people that do like photo shoot preps or even bodybuilding, where some women will diet, and men as well can diet to the point of, for the men, erectile dysfunction, and for the women, a loss of their cycle. That area of like research, is that, and you're probably the only person I know that I can ask this to properly, is the cause, or at least what we would see to be the cause of that loss of function, is that due to the prolonged lack of nutrients, prolonged lack of energy? Does that correlate to anything in your research? Do we know enough about to know the why? I mean, it's fairly obvious that when somebody's like restricting food greatly and restricting energy intake, there's going to be some downstream effects hormonally. But do we actually know what is actually occurring when those things happen?
I'm going to say yes and no.
Yeah, brilliant, yeah.
So I don't know, have you ever heard of like the female athlete triad, or REDS, so relative energy deficiency?
Tell me about it.
That essentially is the loss of 3 consecutive menstrual cycles due to a deficiency in energy. So when you're in a prolonged calorie deficit, that is essentially what happens. And like, if you strip it back to its simplest form and you forget about like the athlete behind it, the menstrual cycle is a marker of health. Yeah. And as female athletes, we do everything we possibly can to not get it, or for it to not be severe, or for it to not affect our performance. So especially in weight category sports, obviously if you're cutting, and honestly, even if you're going the other way, like if you're gaining, your cycle can increase in length. So like you might go from a 24-day cycle to a 30-day cycle. So like it can really vary based off like external stress, sleep, energy intake, energy expenditure. Why?
We don't know. Yeah. Fair. And look, I appreciate that you're actually honest, because I do think, like, we see it in all facets of training and fitness and nutrition, where when people don't have an answer, they make one up and say, this is what it is, which is one of the bad things of the availability and easy access to information on social media nowadays. It's great when the information is good and it's solid, but like that, it's hard to make your way through the noise, because both of these things are presented as about the same. But I'm always curious about that. So just there, when you were talking about for the REDS, is that what you call it?
Yeah.
So prolonged, is that a period of time that's actually like is it 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 20 weeks? Is that a particular period of time that is identified as that duration of time? Or is it just that you have to have 3 consecutive missed periods?
No, so you'd have to have 3 consecutive missed.
Okay.
So like if I missed my June, July and August one, you would send me to a doctor, first of all. And then they might look down the area of REDS, female athlete triad. They might look at like ovulation, things like that. But like that's more, I wouldn't even say sports medicine. That's just straight up medicine. But like I've been in a setting like with my own GP. I have what's called PMDD, so premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So basically PMS on absolute steroids. And I've been in a GP setting where it's been quite disappointing, because I've been essentially dismissed. So he sat me down. He's like, oh, what are you studying in college? Blah, 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 blah. So I tell him like, I'm researching the menstrual cycle. And I was like, look, this is my problem. Like it was quite bad, like this time last year and prior to that. Like there'd be 2 weeks of the month where I would be like a shell of myself. Like I would be in tears all of the time. The only thing I would do was get up and go training and go to work, because I had to do those things. Other than that, I was like, nobody speak to me. But then once I got my period, I was fine. But it was like literally up, down, up, down. And I went to him and I told him this, and he was like, you probably have this, like, but you're like, it'll be grand. He was like, go on the pill.
It'll be grand.
Literally, he was like, it'll be grand. Go on the pill.
Right.
And I'm like,
And that is generally the answer to a lot of problems.
Yeah. And I have a big problem with that. A big problem. Like for him to, and I'm not even, he's man GP. So like it must have been, he's GP.
Yeah.
Man or woman, doesn't matter. The point is, he basically was like, go on the pill. And I'm just going to, number one, mask the symptoms. What happens if down the line I want to come off the pill and have kids? I'm also considering the fact that I'm a weight class athlete. So like we know that hormonal contraceptives can increase our BMR from like 300 to 500 calories, say. So I'm like, I'm considering that. What happens? I've never had any problems, thankfully, with my skin. Like, why are we just going to mask this problem?
Yeah.
Because you don't have the answer. If you don't have the answer to fix my problem, that's okay. But just be honest with me and tell me that.
So that actually raises the next point. It's something I definitely like to touch off. And again, we can speak for if we're in an area, like just as a caveat to everybody listening, if we're in an area of a lack of evidence, even just speaking from your own experience or experience you've had with other people is fine. Because I know you've done some coaching, I know you've spoken to a lot of other people. But like that, some of the girls I've worked with, so like one of the questions I have weekly is like, what week are you in your cycle? Where are you in your cycle? I've had lifters that are like, I'll speak to them about their follicular and luteal phase and they've no idea what I'm talking about. They've never heard of it before. I had 2 girls recently that have come off the pill after being on it for 10 years with no break. And this is just apparently common practice. I've had like that. We have lifters go to, like younger lifters go to the doctor, skin, go on the pill. Do you know? It seems to be just the default answer to almost everything.
Yeah.
And now, look, I'm not saying that it's never the answer, because maybe sometimes it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not educated enough to say that. But I think it's representative, as you've set out to prove, it's representative of a lack of education and understanding and research into this field. And you're right to say it is kind of terrifying in a way, because we've got a lot of, like I said, like one of the girls, 2 of the girls, they're both like under the age of 28. One I think's 25, one's 26, and they've been on the pill 10 years. That's an awful long time, and you're like very like important developmental years from going from being a teen to a young adult into your like mid-20s to have never had would you call it a natural cycle if somebody has a naturally occurring, like they're not on contraceptive, their hormone cycle's
so
not
that's actually like a really good point. There's so many phrases that everyone is like throwing about, and especially in the research area. So if you're naturally menstruating, it means you're not on any form of hormonal contraceptives. You have a menstrual cycle length of 21 to 35 days, and you have a bleed for an average of 3 to 5 days. If you're eumenarcheic, then it's all the same as naturally menstruating, but we've gone and we've checked your temperature and we've checked your hormone levels at ovulation. And we've confirmed that you've ovulated. Yeah. So in the research, and that kind of goes back to the quality of the research, that's kind of why it's really poor quality, because you might read a paper and it might be, these eumenarcheic participants, and you look at the methods and you'll be like, the fucking counting method again. Like, you're not matching what you're saying here. Yeah. And that these are phrases that are getting like thrown around and people have no idea. And like that, you're saying that you have athletes that have no idea what their cycle phases are. Like, the earliest I can think back was when I was in 6th class in primary school. Yeah. What happens is the public health nurse comes in. She sits you down. She talks you through a menstrual cycle and like in very vague detail. Talks you through. I remember her talking us through acne, and that was it. So that's all I know. Bear in mind that the average age of starting your period is like 11 to 13. So like this window could already be closed for some of the girls. And this is all you're told. Then you go into secondary school. In most schools now, science is mandatory. When I was in first year, which was not that long ago, it was not. So like I picked science. So I learned, again, briefly, I learned that there was a follicular phase, a luteal phase, and ovulation was in the middle. It was 28 days. That was that. Same in Leaving Cert Biology. Only before I went down this avenue, I would have been another one of those statistics that didn't know. I think there was a survey done on Australian Olympians back in whenever the last Olympic cycle was. It was 2021, obviously, because we missed it with COVID. and 89% of the female athletes surveyed couldn't identify their cycle phases.
Right.
Like something as basic as identifying like 3 phases, because we can split them up even more, but like they're like the 3 main phases. How are you supposed to, I suppose, manage your expectations, manage symptomology, manage everything around it if you don't know the basics?
Well, I think even to zoom in on just that for a moment, right? And we're talking like, even talking about the area of research you're in now, with looking at weight class based, but even we say powerlifters, right? So we'll look at we'll specifically zoom in at Irish female powerlifters compete in weight class sport that are trying to compete at the top level, go international, right? Earn their singlet. They're probably tracking other metrics like food. They're probably tracking training and fatigue, or even RPE. They might be tracking sleep and steps. Why would you not also track this massive fundamental part of your life?
Yeah.
You know, so that I think highlights, like, what do you think we do from here then? Like, say for us, for people on the ground level, like obviously I'm not a researcher. I'm too fucking stupid to do that. But what do coaches do? What do the athletes do? How do we start making a tangible improvement to this, even on an individual level? Like, we can't like obviously produce research. It would all be anecdotal. It's all just lived experience. But what would your recommendation be if you're speaking specifically to the young female athletes, or, you know, whatever, people from are still in a phase of life where they're going to be experiencing the period, they're going to be going through their cycle in Urban Barbell, and you're talking to them? What do I do? What do the coaches do? How do we make this experience at least a net positive?
The first thing that I would say, like talking to coaches, is don't shut down the conversation ever. If an athlete wants to open up to you about it, sit with open ears. If you know F all about it, fine, tell them that. Like, we appreciate that honesty, because chances are we don't know a whole lot about it either. But like, do not close the conversation, because if you close that once, it's never opening again. Don't make it a big taboo. Don't make it embarrassing. Like, just sit and have the conversation the same way you would if an athlete came to you just wanted a little bit of nutrition advice, or like how to time meals around training. You'd say, oh, do this, this, and this. So it's important that like you have tools in your toolbox that you can, I suppose, give for suggestions. So from a coach's perspective, all we can really say now for sure is track.
Yeah.
You have to track your cycles, track your symptoms as well. Note down, okay, on this particular day, I was feeling X, Y, Z. Because if that trend is reoccurring every cycle, so if, I don't know, like, take your late luteal phase, so like just as you're about to get your period, if you suffer from like bloating then, and if your weight is increasing, if your belt is a little bit more uncomfortable, if you feel kind of shit in your singlet, take note of all of this, so that if potentially, I don't know, you're an under 63 lifter and around that time you tend to fall at like 63.5, 64, do we need to maybe look at more long-term or like chronic weight loss strategies to get you a little bit under, so that you're safer if a comp does fall then, or that you just feel a little bit better. But also take note in terms of like RP is a great one. Like, if you're not using RP, what are you doing? Well, like obviously like for newer lifters and stuff, like it might not always be the way to go, especially when we don't really know how to use it. But like if you've been at it a long time and you can honestly use it well, absolutely use it, because that can correlate. Like, we have this perception of, and I think like Instagram, Twitter, like social media has done this to us, that we have this perception of, oh, like I'm on my period or I'm just about to get my period, so I'm weak, can't do anything. But like, I've had some of my best sessions on my period, because I go into it and I'm like, oh well, shit, like I have a bit of a point to prove here now, because I am where I am in my cycle. So I suppose to go back to what you asked me is not closing off the conversation.
Yeah.
The best thing that you can tell them is track. And if they notice anything irregular or anything that doesn't align with the last couple of cycles, go to the doctor. Like, I do understand that sometimes, again, because we don't know a whole lot about it, that like, at least in my experience, I've had some very dismissive doctor visits. But like, this is like a marker of health. If you're masking it, if you're not taking pill breaks, well, like that's kind of a different thing. But if you're masking it in any way, shape or form because you're underfueling and overperforming, okay, that's fine now. And you get to the top now, that's cool. What happens in 5, 6, 7, 8 years if you want to have kids?
Yeah.
Even if you just like can't regulate your body temperature long term because you've done this. So if you notice anything irregular, go to your doctor. You're not a burden to anyone. Just go.
Do you think there might be a little bit of a culture though for like that, whether it's in sports performance or like to look a certain way? And I won't even necessarily say women, but like do you think people, particularly younger people, are willing to sacrifice their long-term health for something they can have now? Like, oh, well, you know, yeah, I fucked myself up, but I got a singlet. Or, you know, yeah, I lost my period, but I look good in these photographs. Do you think there's a little bit of a culture of that now, perhaps with the likes of social media?
Yeah, well, like we definitely don't think long-term. It's like instant gratification. So you're not thinking about, okay, well, like the likes of me, I'm 25 now. It's like, I'm not really thinking about the next 5 years in terms of menstrual health because I have a fairly healthy, normal, aside from being a little bit mental from time to time, cycle. So like until it becomes a problem, you don't notice the problem.
Yeah.
But when it becomes a problem, it becomes a big problem. So I definitely think, and it's okay to think, well, like I'm going to do this because that's the sacrifice I'm going to make to get my Irish singlet or to get my place on the Irish squad, whatever weight class sport or whatever sport that might be. But it's like, just stop for 1 second and realize this is a marker of health. If you are not getting it, something is off. Like if your leg hurt or if your knee hurt, you do something about it because you're like, oh, I can't perform. But just because you can perform doesn't necessarily mean it's right.
So, very well made point as well, yes. But I would say you've hit off there. So main thing for coaches is be open to the conversation, even if you know very little about the topic. And the best piece of advice, if anything, would just be to start having the athlete track their cycle.
Yeah.
So if you were talking to the athletes then, what might you say?
Honestly, very similar.
Yeah.
In that, talk to each other. Like since I've started researching this and like it has gone up on Instagram and I've been plaguing people for participants, everyone's coming up to me like, Maeve, I have this problem. And I'm like, okay. I'm so happy that you're coming and you're confiding in me. Like genuinely, I love nothing more. And I will sit and talk about periods all the time. Love it. But there's actually very little medical advice I can give you. I would suggest going to the doctor.
It's probably a tricky position to be in because when you know how little confirmed evidence there is, it's very hard to give a definite answer. And usually what most people want is just a definite answer.
Yeah.
And that void will be filled sometimes by people who really shouldn't give a definite answer, but do.
And that's the thing. Like a lot, I obviously know where like the good and the bad research is on Instagram. Like all of my Instagram feed and anything like menstrual cycle related would come from other researchers in the area. And unless they're like a big name on big papers, chances are I don't follow them. And it's funny because all of my friends are like, oh my God, like, why don't you put out stuff? And I'm like, number one, I have severe imposter syndrome. So I absolutely couldn't. But number two, I'm just like, because I know where to get it. And this is so bad. I'm like, because I know where to get it, I just assume everybody else knows. But that's not the case.
So this is actually a point I made to, who was I talking to? I can't remember. It was at one stage last year. But basically, I had a guest on the podcast who had made some like outrageous nutrition remark, right? Something that's so anti-truth that it's ridiculous, right? But they're like, they shouldn't be putting that out there. I'm like, well, probably not because it's not true. But at the same time, you are never going to get someone to stop making bad posts or having bad takes. But you can be the person that's the good takes or puts up good content. Do you know who the nutritional advocate is? Alan Flanagan?
Yes.
So Alan Flanagan, he's gotten a bit nihilistic now in the last while, but his nutrition content's very good.
Okay.
Right? Very, very, very good. But he will oftentimes spend a lot of time talking about like whack jobs like Liver King. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, but the thing is that if the good information isn't available in a palatable way that's the general public are able to consume, because the fact of the matter is people are not very science literate. They're not going to be able to go read a paper. You know what I mean?
They probably don't even know where to find them.
Precisely. So this is what I mean. The same people like that, you might have imposter syndrome. You might not necessarily feel like you should be the resource, but it's you or this person who's telling people they can't strength train when they're on their period. You know what I mean? Or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So again, it kind of boils down to that. If the people that don't know the facts are putting out misinformation, the people that do know the facts are unwilling to put out the misinformation, we can't really blame the layperson for not having access to the information. And frankly, nowadays as well, as people might not like social media, but social media is just a tool. And I think we can use it for good. You know, we can use it to get digestible small pieces of information that might link back to bigger pieces of information. You know what I mean? So like, say like, for example, when we finish here, this will all be split up into nice little clips, which people will click on. They might listen to the whole thing. And then I can provide links in the bottom where they can read more. Now, it might be in, let's say, 1,000 listeners. It might only be 10, but it's still 10 more people that now know where those resources are.
And I think it's like hitting that small number that you forget about, because that's just as important as the big number.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree. And that's exactly it, though. It's like, if you could, because like that, if you could like completely change one person's perspective on a thing and it, 10x's their outcomes or their understanding of themselves, and it's a net positive for them, then it's worth doing it. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like that with informative posts or talking on camera or whatever it might be. It doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but I still think you should do it. Maeve, Mannion, I think you should make informative posts around the menstrual cycle.
Are you calling me out?
I am calling you out, yeah.
You called me out though, like back at Christmas time.
What did I say to you at Christmas time?
We were like messaging back and forth, and you were basically like, you should do it. And I was like, yeah, whatever.
Oh yeah, we were, yeah. No, but that's it though. But that's exactly the point. It's like, I completely get when you see something that like that's wrong, it's very easy to talk to someone about it, but it's like, then say it out loud. You don't have to call people out. And I actually think that's a bit of a problem in fitness in particular. I think there's too many coaches that spend too much time talking about how shit other people's methods are, or how you shouldn't go to this person. This is the correct way to do things. It's like, how about just put out good information and people can follow that then? But yeah, like I would agree with the idea that like it is tricky to know what to put out when you can't really say with certainty that everyone should do this, because it's very hard. But I think everything comes with context.
Yeah, and we're so like I would get messages or like have conversations with some of the girls, especially like at comps and stuff. They'll be asking me stuff, and you want just a straight up answer. Like you want black and white, but it's like, this is the greyest area that you could possibly be in right now, because we're very much, even like when you're reading the papers, like I'm reading them, but I'm reading between the lines. So I'm looking and I'm like, okay, well, did they tick all of these boxes for me? If they did, then yes, I might consider it. If they didn't, then it's not a waste of time, but like, I can't use it. I can't share it. It doesn't make any sense, essentially.
But I do think you've got, like, realistically, think about it. You've got some good workable information there. So first piece of advice is track your cycle. Start to track how you feel on given days or in given weeks or given parts of your cycle. Notice if there's any deviation from that to what you normally experience. And then that's how you can start to find like that. Do you have weight fluctuations up and down? Do you have even perception of performance up and down? Do you have any actual performance? Because this is one thing I've definitely noticed, again, strictly anecdotally, a lot of the lifters that I'll work with is they might report feeling weaker, but the performance is about the same. And
that's having like a good grasp of the research. That's kind of the conclusion I'm coming to. And I'm nearly afraid to say that out loud, because I'm like, it's just having like read a load of shit. Basically, that's the conclusion I'm coming to as well. And even my own perception of performance, I'm like, okay, well, like the last prep I did for USAPL back in February, I remember coming to the end of it and it had been like the most perfect prep ever, like prep of dreams. And I got to the end of it and my period fell on, I think like the second last heavy week, and I did double at 160, so I was doubling my comp max, and I was like, oh shit, like this is gonna be so bad. Literally moved like air. So like, it's a lot to do with how you perceive your performance, and that's actually the next area that I'm going into. So I'm looking at coaches and athletes of weight category sports and how they perceive their performance to change or to not change, because honestly, some people don't even bat an eyelid. So it's basically how they perceive their performance to change or not change over the course of the menstrual cycle phases. Because while we might never be able to sit down and say, okay, every naturally menstruating female should do X, Y, and Z at these phases. And I honestly don't think we'll ever be able to say that. But you can listen to your athletes. So you can take in how they perceive their performance to vary. You can take into consideration how they feel, how their sleep might be affected, how their appetite might be affected, and how their weight might be affected.
Do you think so if we just, again, take the subset in Ireland, just talk with the female lifters you've spoken to, do you think the coaches are doing enough currently?
I think it's easier in an individual sport. Like, I can take myself, prime example. Every week or like every cycle, I'll just mark in on my check-in sheet. Like, I literally just put menstrual cycle, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4.
Yeah.
And now, Ian will probably know anyway because I go absolutely mental. I'll text him, I'll be like, Ian, can I pull sumo? He'll be like, oh, Jesus Christ, here she goes again. I don't pull sumo. But he'll be like, oh God.
You get notions every once in a while.
Yeah. And that's like the trigger. I'm like, sumo. He'll be like, Jesus Christ, come down to Limerick and train, will you?
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you asking me?
So do you think the coaches are doing enough now for lack of more information, for lack of more confirmed data? Do you think, from your experience speaking to the female athletes, they feel like they're being served well enough by their coaches in this area?
Well, out of all the ones I've spoken to, I've never had someone come up to me and say, I haven't discussed this with my coach. So like, that is gold dust.
Yeah.
Because you look at, I know we're going back to like field sports, but obviously I've done a lot of work with like field sport athletes, camogie and rugby. And when I worked with the Offaly senior camogie team, we used a system called Actimate, and just like daily wellness. I think there was programming bits on it. But at the time, they actually approached me and they were like, we're trialing out a menstrual cycle tracking section. Would you want to trial it? Because I think they like found me on LinkedIn or something. I was like, yeah, cool. And honestly, none of them tracked it. None of them had conversations. And I'm like, it's a weird position in the sense that normally when you have an S&C coach with the team, chances are, and this is a very blanket statement, but I'm going to say it anyway, chances are they're males. Like 9 people graduated from my class, 3 were females, 6 were males. So chances are it's male. So you're potentially a little bit less likely to talk to them only because you perceive that they won't understand. So we have to take a little bit of the blame as well as females, is that whether our coach is male or female, we perceive that nobody else understands what we're going through. But that's not the case. Like, a coach can sit and empathize with you. They're never going to fully understand everything you go through, whether they're male or female, because every female cycle is different anyway. So we as females probably need to do a better job at being less embarrassed to talk about it, because everybody goes through it. Like, it's not that big of a deal. And obviously I can say that very flippant and I will speak openly about it. And if you, like, I've been at conferences where they asked me a question, I didn't have an answer. So I literally had to be like, yeah, one time I was cutting weight and my menstrual cycle changed because I don't have the answers. So if you're willing to be, as an athlete, as open as possible, and you give all of this information to your coach, hopefully they will take it on board and go and do a little bit of information. But like, even us sitting having a chat today, like, you're obviously willing to sit here because it might not be a comfortable topic for all males.
I'm very comfortable.
But like, you're probably in the minority.
Potentially. But I think, I don't want to cut across you, but I do think if there are like lads that are not comfortable to have that conversation, it's for lack of any available information. They don't even know where to start. Because I felt like, so recently enough, I'm going to pivot here for a second. You're just going to have to bear with me. I'm hijacking you for 5 minutes. So recently had my first kid, and there's very little available information for men on how to be a supportive partner, how to parent, how you can play a role in whether it's the delivery or immediately postpartum, how to look after a baby. Now, this information is available, but not very readily and not very much geared towards dads. So my partner was sent like reams and reams of links and information and all these resources. So there was like, the Rotunda run like Zoom calls going through some antenatal bits and pieces, how to change a nappy and all that. I tried to join those calls twice, and once I actually got kicked off. So I'm not saying it was on purpose, but still, the point is that like I found that it was not a very, I don't want to say it wasn't welcoming, but it was there was a lot of navigating I had to do to try and figure things out. Now, it's been an absolute treat so far. And a lot of that comes down to my partner being very, very good to me and being very like, here's some resources, here's some stuff you can look at, here's some stuff for you, and keeping me involved in the process, which I think is vital. So I would say from the perspective of a lot of lads, now look, I'll hold my hands up and say, some lads maybe just aren't interested. Some coaches maybe just don't want to hear about it, right? That's definitely the case, at least for some. But there are probably lads out there or athletes out there or other coaches out there who want to know more but don't even know how to begin to ask. So even same for me, like I went and looked things up online. I went and tried to find out more. Like I was lucky enough that when I was qualifying as a trainer, like half my class was girls.
Yeah.
So we could have these conversations about, like, because I've been into strength training for a long time. So some of the girls say, oh geez, yeah, the week in my period, I feel like I couldn't, the 20 kilo bar would nearly crush me. Like, so we'd have this dialogue started very early on when I was qualifying, and it just kind of carried forward. And I think because I started as a personal trainer on the gym floor, the biggest cohort you're going to get is females.
Yeah.
And I think that ties directly into the willingness to say, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm going to hire somebody to show me. Whereas I think people will oftentimes say, well, lads join the gym with an ego. I already know what they're doing. I know how to bench press and bicep curl. Definitely probably an element, but I also think there's an element of not to be willing to be seen to not know what you're doing. It's like the way like all the lads stand around the barbecue, because everyone knows how to barbecue. Maybe they don't. Or if there's something wrong with your car, people will presumptuously, can you change that tire for me? Lads that you never sat behind the steering wheel in his life, how the fuck's he going to change a tire? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just these like presumptions. So I would say there's an element there of that. Like there's probably an unwillingness to be putting yourself in the position that you don't know. But like I, as somebody who is in this position now where I have this very open dialogue with a lot of the girls that I train, and it has been a huge net positive in helping navigate how their training's going, how their mood is during different cycles and different periods of their training blocks. Because if somebody's peak isn't peaking, and they hit that time of the month, that's fucking potentially putting petrol on a fire, opening a can of worms you don't want to have to deal with. So it's great to have that extra information to be able to say, well, when we look back, we can say historically this normally happens. So we know then the week of your meet's going to be fabulous. We're going to be fine. We just got to navigate these next 2 weeks, So I think that's vital. But
and that reassurance for them, like that's gold.
Yes, absolutely. But I think that's
that's your duty as a coach.
Yeah, precisely. So I had Scott Dean on there, and this was exactly the same conversation we just had. How well you program and how professional your check-ins are, how like phenomenal you fucking are as a meet day handler, are all secondary to actually just being in that person's corner and actually having a bit of empathy for them and developing that degree of trust. Like we've talked a little bit about before we start recording about Ian Benson. I love Ian Benson. You know
Absolute
what I mean?
Gem.
He's a real one. I've had Ian on twice now, part of the USAPL Ireland panel and then himself. And when he's home, I'm actually interested in having him on again. I have endless time for Ian. And I think he said that himself. He is very much an empathy-driven coach. He is like, the dad of Irish powerlifting.
Oh my God, he absolutely is. And it's so funny because I actually don't know if I've had this conversation with him, but when I was like moving coaches around this time last year, I was very slow to make a decision in where I'd go and what I'd do and if I even wanted to stay in the sport. And honestly, part of the reason that I went down to Urban Barbell was the podcast that you did with him, because I was like, he sounds like he would be in your corner regardless. And he's been nothing but like since I moved. Yeah,
I've no, that doesn't surprise me at all. Because that's Ian all over. Ian and Emma, lovely people. Yeah. Very like couldn't do enough for you. Like can't say enough good about them. But I think anybody that has met him will have the same opinion.
Yeah.
In any case, I did want to say something. You were mentioning earlier on about the field sports being predominantly male. The coaches are predominantly male.
Yeah.
So I would anecdotally say, if we look back historically, most field sports were typically played by men. Yeah. And even if you look at GAA now, most of the committees are still a group of lads. You can barely convince them to fund a good strength and conditioning coach to run they still think lads need to be running squares around the field to warm up, you know what I mean? So that's still very much stuck in the past. I think one of the benefits we have of powerlifting is that male and female athletes are presented relatively evenly. You know what I mean? There's no real difference in the presentation or how the sport is actually done, other than maybe how the weight classes are done and how we use the DOTS formula, which is fine. You know what I mean? I think it makes and it's actually one of the reasons. So my first 8 or 9 meets were all ab series. And one of the main drivers there for me was that I love the idea that I could compete against people heavier than me or lighter than me or a different gender to me based on a scoring system.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way to do it. And I think that's what opens those doors. And it's one of the things I think I really like about powerlifting. It's not seen as like, maybe in the past it was seen as a big, well, actually I think in the past it was seen as like a convict sport. But I mean, in its modern iteration, I think it's just seen as a barbell sport. In the same way CrossFit and High Rocks are. It's not seen, well, High Rocks is more of a race than anything, but you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It's not a gendered sport.
No.
It's very much it's participation. It's very inclusive participation wise.
Yeah.
Who knew Jay Farrant could be at the forefront of a competition that was more about inclusion than most other people? Isn't that bananas?
Honestly, you said it. You said it.
But you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
But would you agree with that sentiment though? Perhaps a lot of what we were seeing in the GAA and or field sports in general is that like historically it's been a predominantly male-dominated space. And it's only really, I would say maybe in the past 30 years, 40 years, we're seeing more and more young women deciding they want to participate in this thing. And we are, I think that's something to say about 2024 and 21st century. This is very much a transitional period for society at large, because there was a very long period of time where this is what men did, this is what women did. And then the advent of the likes of birth control kind of changed a lot. Yeah. And then society has progressed very, very fast in like last 50 to 75 years. And now we find ourselves where we're, and I'd imagine to a degree for people it's somewhat frustrating, where you want to see more progress now, but we just, we have to wait for everything to catch up almost.
Yeah. And that's like the thing is that the research just hasn't, we've moved too quick for it to physically catch up with us. And the sooner we accept that, and like there's a lovely saying in that females aren't just little men. So yes, not all of the research that is done on males we can apply to females, but like some of it's perfectly fine. Like chances are in terms of like volume intensity, that might not vary a whole lot based off sex. So like some of it's actually, we can use it. Like we don't disregard all of it, but our female athletes do need more. And the sooner we accept that what we have is not of great quality and start producing more high quality stuff and potentially stop trying to compare our males to our females. Like I think the GA do it. It's probably one of the things they do actually kind of well in the terms that like they have like mothers and others. Like the Camogie Association, the LGFA, and then the actual GA, they're all three separate entities. So when I was working with like Offaly Camogie, the actual Camogie Association Ireland, basically in order to get more resources for our female athletes, they now give grants. So they give a grant for S&C, they give a grant for nutrition, sports psych. So like they can pay for the coaches to come on board and actually, I suppose, want to be there, pay for testing, pay for nutritional advice. So like we're definitely catching up, but it's also up to us as female athletes to use the resources. It boils my blood when female athletes are getting access to resources and are not using them, because for me, like the whole reason I went into S&C was like that. I was working up the rankings of like Leinster Rugby, and each year I would get so far. And I don't know, do you know who Tommy Bowe is?
Yeah.
Oh my God. When I was like 12, he had just had like kidney surgery, and they did a documentary, his comeback, on RTE, and they did it up in Queen's University in Belfast. And I saw this and I was like, I want that job. I don't know what that job is. It was basically like sports science, S&C, but I saw that and I was like, I want to work in a lab with treadmills. Like that's so cool. And then I was like noticing the gap for, I suppose, number one, for female coaches, more so in field sports. I don't think it's as prominent, say, in individual sports. So I was like noticing the gap for female coaches, but also like the lack of resources. And that's kind of what led me down that alleyway. Because I'm like, it's very rare, I suppose. It was a weird position when I was coaching girls that were like the same age as me, because they want to be your friend. But it's like, like friendly, but like we have to keep a professional element here, because ultimately like my goal is to get you to be the best athlete that you can.
No, I think that's an interesting one. Do you think that's more so to do when you're working with a team? Because I find, because powerlifting is very much an individual sport, as much as you might represent a club or a team or whatever, or your country, you're still the only one out on the platform lifting. I have found that having the interpersonal relationship develops a greater degree of trust, but I'd imagine that's harder to foster in a team setting environment. What's been your experience with
that? I found it relatively easy with the girls. So I've done work with Leinster Rugby and Offaly Camogie, and I found it relatively easy. Now I've also done work with a couple of intercounty panels at underage. So a lot of the intercounty panels now will get funding during the summer to run S&C sessions for their male under 14s, 15s and 16s. So I've done that the last couple of summers. And they're definitely, it's harder to get their buy-in, which I totally understand. Number one, I'm a girl. So like at 15, what could I possibly have to say? What could I possibly know about field sports? What could I possibly know about getting fitter, faster and stronger? In their eyes, nothing, absolutely nothing. To the point where, it was absolutely iconic. And I would never, ever, ever do this. But last summer, one of them, he was really strong and had really good potential. And we were doing I think he was doing sets of 8 on bench press. And he's 15 and he's banging out 50 kilos for a set of 8. And he turns to me and he's like, why do I have to do this? And I was like, why do you think you have to do this? I'll always spin it back. So I'm like, why do you think you have to do this? And he's like, I don't know, sure, I'm asking you. So I said to him, okay, so what are the movements that you do in football? And he's like, hand passing. And I'm like, okay, so show me what that looks like. And he demonstrated a hand pass. And then he did kicking, running. And I'm like, all of them, am I right in saying you use your arms? Because you have to bring it down to its simplest form. So he's like, yeah. And I'm like, so when you're benching, are you using your arms? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, so you want to get a stronger bench so that you can throw the ball a little bit further, throw it a little bit faster. And then he's kind of like, all right, okay. But he's like, why do I have to do this if you can't do this? And I'm like, whoa, now, hold up. Who said I couldn't do it? And he's like, sure, show me so. And he this was a real culty squad. So I was like, right, okay. I took the sunglasses off the top of my head. I lay down and I took 50 kilos for a set of 10.
Yeah.
And he never questioned me after that. You almost, as a female coach, my, I suppose, experience has been that I have to, especially more so with the young lads, with the older lads, they're just willing to come in and get on with it. They just accept it okay, well, she kind of knows what she's talking about. But you have to prove yourself a little bit.
That's interesting. Tell me more.
Which,
have you had any other occurrences? And I assume when you're saying this, am I right in saying you're talking primarily outside of Dublin, more rural parts of the country?
Yeah.
So the reason I asked that is because I've been involved with some form of sport since I was in school. Never at a very high level, but just even PE. And we've always had there's always been female PE teachers, female sport, teach you how to play basketball, football. It's never crossed my mind that this is ever a weird thing or something this is a person I shouldn't have to listen to. And I wonder, would it be Dublin is quite a bit more progressive than the rest of the country. So I wonder if that plays an element of it, of just the culture in the local town or the local city or whatever it might be. That would be one question. And then the other thing I would say is, and not to say you're not correct, because I do think there is an element of having to prove yourself almost. But these little motherfuckers do this with the lads as well. Right?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I've had a 17-year-old who has never competed before. He was, firstly, he told me he was in a calorie surplus but was losing weight. And I was like, yes, you alone contradicts thermodynamics. Only you. He's like, no, man, I swear to God, I'm eating 8,000 calories a day. Yeah, and your bollocks. But in any case, he was squatting, right? So could hit depth with the bar, could hit depth with 70, 100, got to 120, 130. Suddenly he's like, it's an ankle, it's a hip issue. And I was like, it's not, man. All right. He does at this time, he doesn't really know who I was, right? And not who I am. I'm Iron In with the Iron Mindset podcast. But he didn't know I did powerlifting, you know what I mean? But I was having this little back and forth and I could see him getting pissed off and he was like, well, how the fuck would you know? What do you squat? I was like, I need to qualify myself to you. So I didn't tell him. I was like, it doesn't fucking matter. I'm just trying to help you, whatever. But they'll always, particularly when they're young and they're stupid, they'll always throw a little qualifier at you. What do you know about what I'm trying to do? You know what I mean? And I don't think it actually, listen, I've seen young lads put it up to Jay Farrant in abs powerlifting. Do you know what I mean?
That's interesting because I genuinely thought that I was going to play the female card. I was like, oh, because I'm female. But I'm like, I'm kind of glad that it's...
I would still, look, I would definitely be of the opinion that the occurrence might be more if you're like, you know, particularly a young female coach dealing with a lot of young lads. That is potentially more prevalent. I can't speak to that experience, you know what I mean? But I can definitely say that in general, young lads put it up to you a lot, like a way more. Like this is like in abs specifically, I don't run an academy. You know what I mean? I run an academy plus, which is slightly different, but I won't run an academy because I don't want that fucking headache. You know what I mean? They're all brilliant. They're all fantastic, but they're all a massive pain in the hole. You know what I mean? So like good for them. Well done to all the academy coaches. I value what little hair I have left.
Honestly,
I'm not going that
patience of a saint.
But that's it. Like that's just observationally, I would say, look, in that particular case, maybe that young lad was just, you know, swinging his dick around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But still, you humbled him and I bet it felt good.
Oh, because I said to him, I was like, look, if I bench this, I was like, I do not want to hear your shit for the rest of the summer. Man, he was so quiet for the rest of the summer. After that, it was absolutely gas.
But he probably made some good gains though.
Oh yeah, he did. He was so strong. And like that, I don't know, maybe it's just like the numbers in me. But like to see someone just not utilize their potential, I'm like, you have, and it goes back to, I can guarantee you the females of their age weren't getting them resources during the summer. So I'm like, you're taking the piss with these resources and your counterparts are not getting this.
Yeah. Actually, I'll give you an interesting point that ties into powerlifting, right? And it's not necessarily a gendered thing, but it's definitely the age we're in of powerlifting, right? So as I was mentioning, I was saying this to Scott on the previous episode. So the more time goes on, the more expectations rise on what people want out of powerlifting. So 4 or 5 years ago, it was very rare to walk into anything outside of a powerlifting club and it would have, you know, power bars, deadlift bar, deadlift jack, steel plates, right? Whereas now almost every gym has them. So one of the guys I coach, right, the guy doesn't even bench 100 kilos. And he said to me, if I went into a warm-up room and I had to warm up on a squat cage and bumper plates, I'd probably just fucking walk out, man.
Get a grip.
I was like, are you fucking for real?
Get a grip.
Like, that's outrageous, but that's how people think. So I think, say with that young guy, I'd imagine his older brother or his dad or his uncles all played field sports growing up. So there's probably a sense of entitlement to be there that he wouldn't ever question. You know what I mean? Whereas, like you said earlier on, I'd imagine that's a degree of what this is. Like, you obviously value the resources that are being made available to people now because maybe it's something that wasn't as available when you were growing up, or you recognize globally we still don't have enough available for young females to make a really good go at sports.
Yeah.
But again, the young lads that have had this available to them generationally, we can't hold against them what they didn't know was just being handed to them. And also for the young ladies that maybe, you know, don't really value the fact that there is better gym equipment, there's better understanding of there are just better resources and availability for girls to get into sports now that maybe didn't exist 20 years ago, but still doesn't mean necessarily they are where they should be. I still think it's one of those things that sometimes people don't know what they have because they don't know what work went in to get it to where it is now.
No, like they've no concept of what went on behind the scenes to get like an S&C, to get nutrition, like, and that's, I suppose, I think they shouldn't have to know because like maybe I live in this bubble of it should be equal across the board, but it also shouldn't be because we're not there yet. Like I fully get when people are like, I had an argument with someone before. He plays intercounty football and I was telling him essentially what I was getting paid for doing intercounty S&C work. He was getting more in expenses than me to travel to training and back.
Wow, okay.
Than I was getting paid to do 3 sessions a week, an hour away from my house. And he was like, oh, sure, you don't bring in as much money as us. And I was like, okay, so this is where we're still at. Or at least this is where you think we're still at. So like our counterparts, or some of them, potentially think, oh, well, sure, they don't deserve it because they're not bringing in as much. And it's like, it's that whole 2020 campaign that happened. Like if you can see it, you can be it. And I think like powerlifting has done it really well. And probably because it's an individual sport, we've access to social media. Like if I opened up my Instagram feed now, it would just be all powerlifting and female powerlifters. Because it's like there really is no limit. And I suppose it's not easier, but like it's easier to see in a numbers-based sport because there's no or shouldn't be any nepotism with it. Like the whole reason I stopped playing rugby, I had a really bad experience with a coach. He basically sat me down. It was my first college season of rugby. And, you know, like it's your first time away from home. Like I was probably not like my best mentally. So like rugby was my outlet. Like, and he sat me down and like when I was growing up playing rugby, like I was starting every week. And all of a sudden I get there and he's like, right, okay, like you're starting. I'm like, class, like unreal. So we play a couple of matches. I start all of them. And then we had our first home game. And he's like, right, Maeve, like we're training Monday night and the match was Wednesday. He's like, right, okay, you're starting Wednesday night. You're starting number 2. He's like, make sure you have X, Y, and Z plays and go through them tonight. I'm like, yep, cool, no problem. And I go in Wednesday and like, I'm thinking, oh, first home game. Like we get our jerseys hung up, we get our names like printed out, like this is gonna be class. So I go in, my fucking name is not over my jersey. So like there's another girl's name over the number 2 jersey. And I'm like, oh. And I go over and normally like replacement hooker is like 16. So I go over and my name is over 16. And I'm like, what the hell? So I said nothing. And I put on the jersey, went out to the warm-up. And like near the end of the warm-up, he came over to me and he's like, look, he's like, this girl is like playing for Connacht. She's off this week. She's coming back. So I'm just going to start her. And I'm like, okay. And I don't know what switch flipped in my head. But he came back. He was like, I might put you on at halftime. And I was like, okay. And he comes back to me at halftime and he's like, yeah, he's like, I'm going to give her another 20 minutes. Like she's running well, like, and I'll put you on then. And I'm like, honestly, don't bother. And I took off the jersey there and then I handed it to him and I never set foot on a rugby pitch again. And I'm not like an irrational person, but I just was like, I could be doing something not better with my time because I loved it, but I'm like, I could be valued somewhere else, or like my work ethic could be valued at something else. Like I could maybe work hard studying, I could pick up something else, like I can do something else where, and that's probably why I fell into powerlifting, you do all of the hard work and you get your 9 minutes on the platform. Whereas like with a field sport, you essentially have no control over whether you get played or not. You can work as hard as you want. I'm like not dissing all field sports, but like there is that element of someone is potentially going to be better than you regardless of how hard you work. It's the same in powerlifting, but at least if you have a number to work towards, or like you're just focused on putting 2.5 kilos on your total, like you have something. And regardless of how good, bad or indifferent a prep is, you get your 9 minutes on the platform. So I suppose as coaches, like we have to be conscious of keeping our females in the sport. Like Sport Ireland did a massive survey in 2019 and they looked at sport and exercise participation and even just exercise participation alone. So like I think the World Health Organization recommends your 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a week. And basically by the time they looked at dropout rates in sport as well, and I think between the ages of, I either want to say 15 to 20 or 18 to 20, I can't remember how specifically they broke it up, only 5% of females in Ireland were left playing sports. So I'm like, you as a coach need to recognize this. I'm not talking about him specifically, I'm talking about everyone. You need to recognize that these are like crucial years. Because if you can keep it up, they also had something about if you can keep it up, basically you're in it for life.
Yeah.
If you can get through this like foggy period, you're in it for life. And it's probably why like a lot of females are like the females that we're seeing now and like our juniors, they're kind of coming in around like 18, 19, 20. Because chances are it's probably a lot of their first sports, but also they're coming from something else. Like that's what happened to me, was that I was like, okay, well, when I was playing rugby, I was like relatively decent at the gym. I liked the gym. I want some element of competition. So I was like, oh, I'll powerlift.
That's a good motivator to do it. And I think you will see that a lot of like former rugby players do come in. I think at least a third of the powerlifters I've had on here were former rugby players. Well, let me ask just a couple of things. Do you think if you weren't told you were starting that you wouldn't have been as upset as you were?
100%.
And so you think it was the dangling of the carrot and then pulling it away?
Yeah. And like, you know, it was like first home game. Like my parents had come up to watch it. I'm like, yeah, like dad, like, because that was like, I come from a family of 2 sisters. So like, that was how like me and dad, like not bonded, but like that was our big thing in common was he would take me to training. Like he always talks like back about like CDs we would listen to. Like, I don't remember this, but like that's his like core memory, say, of me and him. Like, it's like, I remember ringing him on the Monday being like, oh, like I'm starting, like blah, blah, blah. And then I come up and I was not starting. And it was more like the disrespect for, it probably wasn't even that deep to him. But
Absolutely
to me,
no.
it was like a disrespect of my time. Like just in general, you're not respecting the work that I'm putting into this. Like I'm a first year, she's a fourth year. Like she's been doing this for 4 years. I'm like, cool. Like she's playing for Connacht. She gets to come back and like just start. Like that's gold. But also like communicate this better.
Yeah.
And you might not have, I may not have left rugby that day.
Yeah, I think it's always so tricky when you look at field sports, particularly because they're not thinking of the individual, they're thinking of the team.
Yeah.
How well the team does. But I think it's like you said, it's mismanaging the individual. Like I'd imagine hypothetically, if you had gotten a phone call during the week and the situation had been explained, you might have been way more receptive to it.
Yeah.
Still probably let down.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a huge lesson, I think, for all coaches, whether they're in a team sport or an individual sport. Being as transparent and communicating is the best way forward, because eventually people are going to get upset or let down.
Yeah,
that's
100%.
an inevitability.
Yeah.
So how you navigate that is the most important thing. Like, even when it comes to, like, I've had this with lifters where like what they want to do on a day and what they're physically capable of doing are 2 different things. So we need to manage, let's say you want to squat 150 kilos, but the most you're ever going to get on the day is 142.5, right? No matter how hard you try and how much you fucking thug it out and grind, it's just not happening, right? We need to decide, is it enough for you to, you know, take your 142.5 at about a 9, or to risk and try and like somehow miraculously pull 150 kilos out of your arse? Are you okay with going 2 for 3 to get that risk?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, it's like, well, then we're not fucking risking it.
No, you can't have your cake and eat it.
But this is the problem with I don't know. I actually said this to Scott and he actually disagreed, but this is an observational thing I have about powerlifters, right? People that have come from other sports, right? Particularly if they were in that sport for a long time and now they've been in powerlifting for a long time. So let's just say collectively 10 years. Those people are way better at managing the fact that the goal of the day is a bigger total. I might squat 5 kilos less and deadlift 15 kilos more, and that's still a win, right? Whereas there's some people that powerlifting is their first sport and they'll get a 2.5 kilo bench PB and cry because it wasn't a 5 kilo bench PB. You know what I mean? Or like fucking belts across warm-up rooms or whatever. I'm like, Jesus Christ, we're just lifting weights. And don't get me wrong, I know it means a lot to people and I love that about it. But like I know it meant a lot to you when Dale and I were cheering you on at the Urban Barbell Regional. That made your fucking day.
Oh, I'm like the quiet, like I'm such a quiet lifter. I'm like, honestly, there was nothing in my headphones that day. And I think I've just fully exposed myself. Because chances are there's probably nothing. Actually, they died like right before my first squat. Yeah, I was like, Sean, these are dead, but like, I'm just going to leave them on. He's like, cool. But I'm like the quietest lifter. Like Ian will tell you, like I sit like as close to the platform as I can with my lifting cast open. And I'm like, right, okay, 1 more to go, 2 more to go. And then I'll be like, right, okay, I'm ready. Come on. Like, I'm like, don't need hype, don't need anything. But I feel like managing expectations, I'm like, okay at. Like going into the Urban Barbell comp that I did, I was like, okay, like I definitely want to squat 180 because like it had been going well. I actually flew over to Prague for my last heavy squat.
I had heard you.
Yeah, I'm like mental, but flew over, did my last heavy and it moved so well. So I was like, maybe there's like a little bit more there on the day. But like obviously in the run up to that comp, like I was helping like organising it. I was also like reading for the Leaving Cert, so random. So like it was a bit of a stressful run up. So like chatting on the phone, say to Ian the night before, he's like, Maeve, like you're coming in at a lighter body weight than you were for USAPL. He's like, you're bound to put 10 kilos on your squat. Because I hadn't the last like bench and deadlift after obviously like travelling home and then going straight into like the Leaving Cert work weren't fantastic, and I wasn't feeling very optimistic. So I was like, I have no idea really how this is going to go. And he's like, just relax, like just have fun. And I think, like, I always think back to my first competition, like, oh, it was so much fun. So much fun because I'd no idea what to expect. And then the next couple I did were not that fun. Like, they were good. Like, they were good crack. And I'm sure I had, like, good crack on the day. And I'm, like, fairly easy going on the day. But, like, the last couple I did, say, I took, like, a massive off season. I took, like, 10 or 11 months between, like, moving coaches and clubs, etc. But the last couple I did before I moved over coaches, they were not good. Like, I did not manage my expectations well. And I think it's why I kind of steered more towards, like, USAPL and moving clubs and moving coaches. I just needed a fresh start, or else I wasn't staying in this sport. Because the 2 years prior, I was like chasing top seven, and I was falling short each time. And it was because of my deadlift. And I was like, I don't really know how to fix this. And it got to the point, it was such a mental thing as well. I was like, I actually got a sports psych because I was like, I need to get out of my own head on this. So, like, coming into the urban barbell comp, he was just like, why can't you just, like, be happy and take, like, a DOTS PB? Because you're going to get that anyway because you're coming in lighter. And I'm like, yeah, but, you know, I want, like, 25, 30 kilos added onto my total. And he's like, oh, for God's sake. So it's all about, like, managing expectations and coming away happy. Because there's been a few times, like, I've kind of had conversations and I'm like, and maybe I'm really exposing myself. And I'm like, do people like this sport? Because sometimes I'm like, I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love everything it's done for me. Like, literally, I have so many things to be thankful for in this sport, between friends, opportunities it's given me. But sometimes I came away from the USAPL comp and my literal return to the platform, new coach, new club, best competition I'd ever put down. Man, I cried the whole way home.
Why?
Oh, I rang Liz, right? Like, we'd literally just pull out the red cow. So, like, I competed in the morning and I refed in the afternoon. So I think I was just, like, a bit overwhelmed.
A bit of a long day as well.
Yeah, so I ring Liz. I'm like, Liz, I was like, I love urban barbell and I love, like, the bones of everyone, but, like, I don't actually know if I like powerlifting, because, like, I'm one of these people that I'm like, is anything ever going to be good enough? And I hate myself for it. Like, me and Benson have had so many conversations over this, and he's like, you need to stop for 5 minutes and smell the roses and then you can work towards it. Like, someone said it to me, I can't remember, but, like, the last comp recap I did for the urban barbell comp, the bottom of it is like, oh, like, T minus 20 kilos till I squat 200. And it's like, I think it was you. You're like, can you not just appreciate the fact that you've just, like, loaded 180 and squatted it? And I'm like, yeah, I can. But, like, I'm just like, will I ever be satisfied?
I think that is symptomatic of many people in powerlifting. And I think you said it there, does anyone even enjoy this?
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think a lot of people do it. I have some extremely hot takes on that, though.
Oh my God, go.
I think a lot of people use the words, I'm very competitive. No, you're not. Because if all you ever do is beat yourself up and nothing's ever good enough and you're always comparing yourself to externals, that's not what competitive is. Competitive is loving to test yourself against the best people, even if you come last, because being competitive means you're in the competition. It doesn't, if I'm in a field of, like, 20 people and I'm number fucking 20, right? That's still in the competition, whereas everybody else isn't. If I go to an international meet and I come last in my weight class, I still competed internationally. It doesn't matter that I'm last.
Yeah.
Sure, being number one on the podium, going 9 for 9 PB and everything, getting a fucking 900 kilo total with 550 dots would be class.
Is that your home screen on your phone?
Absolutely. I'm a bit of a sociopath. I don't have a home screen.
Oh God, you're mental.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That is actually, I've actually been told that that's weird.
Oh, that's
so a bit
strange.
of a red flag. Yeah, I don't have a screensaver either.
Oh God.
Yeah, that's who you're dealing with right now. But in any case, I think it's like, so I'll give you an example. In Iceland last year for Westerns, I had a pretty bad day. I missed all my third attempts. I weighed in way too light. I totaled significantly lower than I had before, and I got a lower dot score. But I can walk away saying, and I came last in the class, obviously. But I still put up a 700 kilo total, 450 dots, and I still got to wear the air singlet on a bad day. And I'm like, you know what? That's good enough for all the circumstances around it. I'm planning to do better in September, but that was enough for what I want. Now, I was going into that, me projecting 50 or 60 kilos more in my total, but I accepted it for what it was because of the circumstances around it. So it is what it is.
Can I ask you?
Yes.
Do you think if that was a regional meet, you'd feel the same?
Yeah, because I probably would have won. Being honest, like, you know, of course. Like, I mean, that would, like, I think if, like, I'd got, like, realistically, I don't think good powerlifting meets are measured off how many successful attempts you have. I think they're measured off what you got from the experience and letting the performance be reflective of the circumstances around it. Now, you're not going to linearly progress every single meet. No. That's just not possible. So sometimes you're going to take a small regression, but that week, a friend of mine died. So I was like, okay, I'm a bit upset about this.
Yeah.
So, this is a huge external. I'm also traveling abroad to compete for the first time. That's an external. You know what I mean? Appetite and sleep wasn't really great. So that's an external. So this is what I mean. I took that into account, and then I competed 7 weeks later and put 30 kilos on that total. So I was like, okay, so we know now that these are the circumstances that affected this versus this date. So these are the things, you can always take a lesson from the meets. I said this to Scott as well. This is what when I look at powerlifting and when I compete, what I want from a competition. PBs are great. Totals are great. Getting on the podium is great, right? But one day, we're all going to not compete anymore, right? We're going to have our last competition. And all we're going to have is cool pictures and cool videos. And no one's going to say, how much were you lifting in that picture? They might the odd time, but no one's really going to care. They're going to go, that looks class. So when I lift, I turn into a fucking maniac. I attack my handlers and I have a fucking ball. I used to do pro wrestling, so I'd like to ham it up a little bit. You know what I mean? So that's how I lift, because the thing is, I've watched people go out to, squat massive weights and you could hear a pin drop. And then I've watched lifters go to bench 40 kilos, but the crowd all know them and the crowd come alive. And that's cool.
Yeah.
That's what this is all about. Because realistically, no one actually cares what we lift. Because, if you tell your folks you squatted 150, you squatted 180, or you squatted 200, all they hear is heavy. Oh, mind your back, Maeve.
Literally.
Oh, Maeve, mind your back, right? Oh, that's great, but mind your back, love. You know what I mean? Make sure you're looking after yourself. Because to them, it's enough that you're up there doing the thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. And it's the same for everybody else that supports you in our silly little sport. They don't care that how much you're lifting. They care that you're there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing I think people miss with powerlifting. You could never PB again, and everyone in Urban Barbell will still be happy that you come down and train, and still be happy that you turn up to the meets, and still be happy that you're there to either handle them or ref for them or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And I think I definitely forget that. And I think when I started powerlifting, I started very much as an individual. So now that I have this team around me, I'm like, oh, I'm actually valued for more than just a lifter.
Yeah.
I'm valued because I get to handle my friends. How cool is that? I get to referee for them. I get to help set up competitions. It's so much more than just like you said, the weight on the bar. It really doesn't matter. And it's for the weight on the bar, it's not a matter of if, it's just when. That will happen. It's just, you just have to let it happen. But you do have to remember to have a little bit of fun. That's my new thing. I'm doing a beginner's strong woman competition.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Where are you doing it?
In Abs.
Oh, no way. That's in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Is that soon? Is it?
Yeah, very soon.
That's going to next
3
week.
weeks.
Oh, that's class.
Yeah. So basically what happened was, when I did the USAPL comp, I was kind of okay, what will I do next? I need something. And then our comp came up in-house. So I was like, lovely. I get to prep with my friends, do a rapid prep. I've only ever done one of them before and it wasn't that good. So I was like, I get to kind of draw a line under the carpet on that one. And then in the middle of that, the GSP announced the beginner strong woman competition. And I kind of sent it to Ian on Instagram. I was like, what do you think? He's like, I think it'd be a good side quest, buy a ticket. And then I did, then I did the Urban Barbell comp 2 weeks ago. Sure, I didn't do a tap training. I took 2 weeks off. I've never, in my 5 years of powerlifting, every time I've gone on holidays, every single time I've competed, I've been back on program the next week. Took 2 weeks off and I was like, oh shit, I have to compete in 3 weeks.
You'll be fine.
Oh yeah, it's supposed to be fun. So I asked so many times, I was like, can I please pull out this? Please. And he's like, no. He's like, I'll tell you why afterwards. I'm like, you're just going to tell me it was fun. But he's probably right.
He 100%.
He's always right.
Ian Benson's never wrong.
No, never. You heard it here first.
Yeah. And you know what? I think as well, as maybe a small spoiler, maybe he's thinking if you just went and had a competition with no expectations, just did it for the crack, maybe it'll help you remember why you did powerlifting in the first place.
Yeah, I think the two Ians are right there.
I'm telling you now. Right, we're going to wrap it up soon, but really quick, Irish rugby, smash or pass? Cian Healy.
Oh, smash.
Mac Hansen.
Smash.
Jesus Christ, Johnny Sexton.
Pass now because he's kind of old. He would have been a smash in 2012.
Okay, right. So 12 years ago.
Jesus, I'm kind of old now. Yeah.
So when you were 14 and when you're 13. Okay, all right. You know what? That's a fantastic place to leave it. Maeve, I'm going to get some resources off you. I'll put those down in the description. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.